با درود و سلام خدمت شما بینندگان عزیز تلویزیون جهانی کانال 1 با برنامه دیگه از سری برنامه طلوع خدمت شما هستیم. مهمان ویژه این هفته ما پروفسور امران میر، اکزیکیتیو دیرکتور در دیوید گفن اسکول آف مدیسن هستند، اوپنهایمر سنتر فور نوروبیولوژی آف استرس. پروفسور امران میر رو برای اینتروداکشن من بایوشون رو میخونم براتون. Professor Emeran Meyer is a gastroenterologist, neuroscientist, and distinguished research professor in the Department of Medicine, Physiology, and Psychiatry at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA, and the executive director of the G. Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress and Resilience at UCLA. As one of the pioneers and leading researchers in the role of mind-brain-body interactions in health and chronic disease. In particular, in IBS, his scientific contributions to U.S. national and international communities in the broad area of basic and translational enteric neurobiology with wide-ranging applications in clinical GI disease and disorders is unparalleled. He has published more than 370 scientific papers and co-edited 3 books. He is the recipient of the 2016 David Macklin Award from the American Psychosomatic Society and the 2017 Ismar Boss Medal from the German Society of Gastroenterology and Metabolic Disease. His most recent work has focused on alterations in the bidirectional communications within the brain-gut microbiome axis and their role in chronic inflammatory and functional diseases of the gut, obesity, and cognitive decline. Professor Meyer has been interviewed on National Public Radio, PBS, and by many national and international media outlets, including the Los Angeles Times, Atlantic, and Times Magazine, Stern and Spiegel Online. He has spoken at UCLA TEDx on the mysterious origins of gut feeling in 2015, and his best-selling book, The Mind-Gut Connection, was published by HarperCollins in July of 2016, has been translated into 16 languages, and remained a #1 bestseller until recently. His new book, The Gut Immune Connection, is published in June 2021. پروفسور امران میر دیستینگویش پروفسور UCLA هستند و اکزیکیتیو دیرکتور دیوید گفن اسکول آف مدیسن و اوپنهایمر سنتر فور نوروبیولوژی استرس هستند. ایشون ایواردهای مختلفی بهشون تعلق گرفته، از جمله ایوارد مدال از جرمن سوسایتی آف گاستروآنترولوژی در مورد بیماریهای متابولیک و گوارشی و همینطور ایشون یافته‌های ارزنده‌ای در مورد محور مایکروبیوم و نقششون در بیماریهای التهابی، روده، چاقی و اختلالات مغزی و شناختی میتونه داشته باشه. دکتر مایر در تلویزیون‌های مختلفی از جمله رادیو ملی و همینطور لس آنجلس تایمز و بسیاری مجلات مختلف و UCLA TEDx برنامهش سخنرانی داشتن. ایشون 2 کتاب دارن که به 16 زبان ترجمه شده. از جمله کتاب‌های ایشون که پرفروشترین کتاب‌ها هم بوده Mind Gut Connection هست و کتاب دیگه‌ای که امسال تابستون منتشر شد در جون 2021 The Gut Immune Connection نام داره. Professor Emeran Meyer, I'm so honored for this interview. Thank you so much for your time and accepting my invitation.
Yeah, thanks, Nagar, for having me on this program. It's an honor to be there and talking to you. Look forward to it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I know you have been working, you are a legend in the field of mind-gut axis. So I would love to start with the history of the things that led to this story. Tell us about yourself and your practice and how you got into gastroenterology and neuroscience.
Yeah, it's a long story. I'm gonna give you a short version. You know, I've always been interested in these interactions between the mind, the brain, and the body in general. During my doctoral thesis, I studied the interactions of the brain with the heart, and then later during my clinical training, moved the body part to the gastrointestinal system, and I've pursued this ever since for the last 40 years or so. Initially, with a main focus on just the brain-gut interactions in irritable bowel syndrome and chronic abdominal pain. Then in the last 10 years, it's sort of expanded really to include the microbiome in these interactions, and then widening the application of this from IBS to many other disorders, from brain disorders, depression, Alzheimer's disease, autism spectrum. And so this has become, when I started my interest in this, it was a very unknown and unappreciated field of medicine and gastroenterology. And today it's a very hot topic. The lay media are full of articles and reports on it. There's a lot of very exciting research happening in animal models, but we're gradually extending this into human studies and human applications. My patients have always been patients that realized long before the physicians that there was a link between the mind, the brain, emotions, stress, and gut symptoms. This has taken a long time for the field of medicine to accept that connection, but today based on many studies, both in animals and humans, we know that there is this connection, and that today we even know that the microbes play a role in communicating with the mind and the brain communicating with the microbes, and ultimately it results in patients that have symptoms, chronic symptoms, but don't find the experts that can help them dealing with their symptoms. So a lot of these patients are very satisfied that finally there's an explanation for why they're experiencing abdominal pain and discomfort, and specialists have not been able to find out what's wrong with them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meyer. من از دکتر مایر سوال کردم که به ما بگن راجع به خودشون و طبابتشون چطور علاقمند شدن به این فیلد. آقای دکتر مایر اشاره کردن که همیشه ایشون علاقمند بودن به رابطه بین مغز و بدن و در دوران تحصیلات پزشکیشون ایشون رابطه بین مغز و قلب رو شروع کردن بررسی بکنن. در دوران کلینیکی از قلب ایشون متمرکز شدن به سیستم گوارشی، علاقهشون رو به اون سمت بیشتر بردن و در 40 سال گذشته بیشتر متمرکز بوده تحقیقات ایشون روی رابطه بین مغز و روده و سیستم گوارشی و دردهای مزمن شکمی. در 10 سال گذشته هم ایشون میکروبیوم رو به تحقیقاتشون اضافه کردن و همینطور گسترش دادن به IBS Inflammatory Bowel Syndrome و بیماریهای دیگه حتی مثل افسردگی و آلزایمر که هنوز اینها ناشناخته بود و خیلی زمان برد تا علم پزشکی قبول بکنه این ارتباط رو و تحقیقات ایشون خیلی پایونیر و راهبردی بوده در این زمینه. تحقیقات مختلفی از آزمایشگاه‌ها شروع شده و الان در مرحله بالینی هست و بیمارانی که مزمن درد شکم داشتن مشخص شده که همیشه یک ارتباطی بین مغز و استرس و علائم گوارشی وجود داشته و زمان زیادی برد که علم این رابطه رو قبول بکنه. و الان هم مشخص شده که حتی میکروب های داخل سیستم گوارشی با روده و مغز یک ارتباط دو طرفه میتونن ایجاد بکنن، علائم مزمنی ایجاد میکنن که پزشکان سعی میکنن اونا رو بررسی کنن و بیمارا خیلی راضیان از این که خیلی زود پزشکا با این مکانیزم میتونن مشکلاتشون رو سریعتر تشخیص بدن و به نتیجه برسن. Professor Meyer, I see you are on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and so many other platforms. Tell us about your mission and goals.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, having been in academic medicine and at UCLA, you know, one of my main missions has been throughout my career, scientific publications and communications to my colleagues around the world. And, you know, with the publication of my first book, something happened very unexpectedly that all of a sudden, you know, my message reached a much wider audience. There was feedback from a lot of people outside of gastroenterology, from a lot of patients, but also from, you know, a range of other fields that found that concept very intriguing, ranging from sports medicine to, you know, philosophy, psychology, psychiatry, so many other fields outside of my main target audience. And that has become even stronger with my second book, where, you know, we've launched a big social media campaign. And this has made me realize that, you know, that I can reach a much bigger audience than in my traditional career by going, you know, worldwide with social media messages and communications. And that's sort of really become my main mission, to reach as many people as possible around the world with evidence-based information about this field, both of the science, the brain-gut microbiome interactions, but also about clinical problems like IBS, where there's a lot of myths out there and wrong information. There's also the area of diet, which there's even more myths and misinformation out there, you know, almost like a culture war between individuals promoting different types of diets. So this is a very exciting stage of my career, where I can have the tools and the platforms now to reach, you know, a worldwide audience with the information that I would like to get out there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meyer. من از دکتر مایر پرسیدم که شما در پلتفرم‌های اجتماعی مثل یوتیوب و فیسبوک و پلتفرم‌های دیگه خیلی فعال هستید. علتش چیه؟ آقای دکتر فرمودن که صادقانه بگم در بحث آکادمیک از اهداف من همیشه این بوده که با همه همکارام در همه دنیا ارتباط برقرار بکنم و با کتاب اولی که ایشون منتشر کردن، ایشون فیدبک گرفتن که خیلی از بیمارا و همکارا در نقاط مختلف دنیا مایلن بیشتر بدونن. همینطور فیلدهای دیگه مثل طب ورزش، مثل حتی فیلسوف‌ها، روانپزشکا، روانکاوها، که با کتاب دوم ایشون این درخواست ها بیشتر شده و ایشون درکشون این هست که با این پلتفرم های اجتماعی میتونن با تعداد بیشتری از همکاران، بیماران و شنونده ها ارتباط برقرار بکنن و در نتیجه تحقیقات محکمتر مبنی بر شواهد رو داشته باشن. مثالی که ایشون زدن IBS هست، Inflammatory Bowel Syndrome. ایشون معتقدن که فرهنگ غلطی وجود داشته راجع به درمان یک سری بیماریهای گوارشی مثل IBS، رژیم‌های غلطی توصیه می شده که این ارتباطات باعث شده تحقیقات جدید و ایشون بتونن به صورت worldwide، به صورت گلوبال با همه مردم دنیا تقسیم بکنن و با همدیگه در میون بذارن. Dr. Meyer, what is microbiome?
So the microbiome, you know, is a collection, or what we call an ecosystem of microbes that include bacteria and an entity of microorganisms called archaea, and which can settle many different places on the planet, including our body. Every part of our body has, any surface of our body has its own microbiome, like the skin, the face, the oral cavity, and the gut. When we talk about the gut microbiome, we're talking about some 40 trillion microorganisms that live, and about 1,000 species that live in different parts of our GI tract, gastrointestinal tract, from the mouth, stomach, small intestine, all the way down to the end of the large intestine. The density and the abundance increases the further down you go. So the highest density and concentration is really in the large intestine. And these microbes, they have lived in our gastrointestinal tract for, hundreds of thousands of years, and they produce molecules with which they interact and talk to each other, but also with which they communicate with our gut, different cells within our gut, and have a very intricate communication relationship between our gut and the signals that come from our gut and go to the rest of our body. So, for example, the vagus nerve that innervates the gut picks up many of the signals of the microbes, takes them to the brain. Some of these signaling molecules from the microbes get into the bloodstream and travel through the body, including the brain. And there's a very, because it's been preserved over evolution in many animal species, in most animal species, that they have microbes living in their gut. So this system has almost made the microbiome a part of our body, another organ. Some people have called it another organ because it's so closely connected in both directions. Our body, through signals in the gut, can influence the microbial behavior and what they do and what they produce, and the microbes can influence our gut function and every other system within our body, from the liver to the brain to the heart, is under this influence. And then, importantly, the microbes use our food mainly to generate these signals that they produce. So the microbes are also a very close link between our diet, what we eat, also the bad things in our diet, chemicals, toxins. All of this will be translated by the microbes into signals that go to our body. So very important part of our overall health, and probably also, as we know today from many animal studies, a very important part of many of our chronic diseases if something goes wrong in the microbiome.
Thank you so much, Professor Meyer. من از پروفسور مایر سوال کردم که ماکروبایوم چی هست. ایشون توضیح دادن که ماکروبایوم ها مجموعی از اکوسیستم های میکروب ها، باکتری ها هستن که میتونن جاهای مختلفی در دنیا وجود داشته باشن، از جمله بدن خود ما انسان ها. و ایشون اشاره کردن که ماکروبیوم ها توی بدن ما توی ارگان های مختلف هستن، مثل پوست ما، مثل صورت، مثل دهان و روده، که اشاره کردن در روده 40 تریلیون ماکروبیوم هست از هزاران گونه در جی آی ترکت، در قسمت گوارشی ما. و همینطور در دهان، معده، روده کوچک و روده بزرگ. و ایشون اشاره کردن که اینها مولکول هایی تولید میکنن، این میکروب ها، که با همدیگه حرف میزنن، هم با خودشون هم با روده و ارگان های بدن ما یک سری سیگنال ها و پیغام هایی رو میفرستن. همینطور سیگنال هایی رو به تمام بدن از جمله عصب واگ میتونن بدن که به مغز میره، یا این سیگنال ها میتونه وارد خون بشه و در نتیجه گردش پیدا بکنه و ارگان های مختلف مثل مغز و قلب رو تحت تاثیر قرار بده. خیلی حیوانات هم این میکروب ها رو دارن و بدن ما هم داره و این ارتباط دو طرفه هست، هم بین میکروب ها هم بین بدن. یعنی هم بدن میتونه میکروب ها رو تحت تاثیر قرار بده، هم میکروب ها میتونن بدن رو تحت تاثیر قرار بدن. و همینطور ایشون اشاره کردن که توکسین ها و غذاهایی که میخوریم خیلی اثر دارن روی سلامت عمومی ما و خیلی بیماری های مزمن که میتونن به خاطر همین ارتباط دو طرفه ایجاد بشن. بنابراین اهمیت این رو خیلی بیشتر روشن میکنه. Professor Meyer, what is the brain-gut microbiome system?
Yeah, so this is just an explanation for what I tried to explain to you. You know, we first studied the interactions between the brain and the gut, and the term of the brain-gut axis was used for a long time. And this interaction between the brain and the gut is bidirectional. So the brain talks to the gut talks back to the brain. It's like a circular conversation. And then about 10 years ago, this integrated connection of the microbes with that brain-gut system was discovered, and is still being still being characterized in greater and greater detail. We know a lot today about this, how integrated the connections are. And so now today we talk about a brain-gut microbiome system. The system is something that is not a linear axis where what happens in one end, has a consequence at the other end, but it's a system that constantly sends signals in both directions with many different feedback loops. And the reason that this is important to emphasize is because in terms of understanding it, but also developing therapies, we can't just develop a pill, for example, that acts on a particular microbe or on a particular receptor in this brain-gut microbiome system, but we have to understand the interactions of the whole system. And so the challenge will be to come up with new therapies that, pharmaceutical therapies that can influence that system. What we know today is that, we can influence, for example, the brain with different types of mind-directed therapies like mindfulness-based stress reduction, meditation, other stress reduction techniques, hypnosis, all of which basically use the complexity of the brain to readjust the balance within this brain-gut microbiome system. Or we can focus on the other end, on the gut, and use diet containing thousands of molecules that interact with the different types of microbes, many of which we don't really understand yet in detail, but we know that if you give a healthy diet, we provide an optimal environment for these microbes and to produce a homeostatic state or a health-promoting state within this brain-gut microbiome system. So at the moment, we're kind of left with a pretty general approach, therapeutic approach. There's obviously a lot of work going on in industry, startup companies, pharmaceutical industry, to develop, pills and sort of traditional pharmaceutical interventions. If and how this will be successful we'll learn in the future, in the next 10 years or so. In the meantime, I think the main message that we have learned from this understanding the brain-gut microbiome system is that a healthy diet and a healthy mind are the two factors that are most important to keep the system, either to maintain the system in a healthy state, in a healthy person, or to move somebody who has left this balanced state back into a normal, healthy state. So that's all where we are today. We have a lot of knowledge in the science and the details of these interactions, but in my opinion, we're still pretty far away from having specific, therapies that fit more into the traditional medical system. It's mainly dietary recommendations and these mind-based strategy In my practice, I use a combination of those two. So any patient that comes to me, I don't just treat the gut or the brain. I always treat this brain-gut microbiome system in a holistic way.
من از دکتر مایر سوال کردم که این ارتباط بین روده و مغز به چه صورت هست. ایشون گفتن همون ارتباطی است که به عنوان محور مغز روده توضیح دادن ایشون، که یک ارتباط دو طرفه هست و ایشون گفتن تداخل‌های مختلف رو ما در پیش هستیم که بفهمیم، همینطور شرکت‌های فارماسوتیکال که درمان‌های دارویی هم میتونن روی این سیستم تداخل ایجاد بکنن. ایشون گفتن که میشه یا به یک سمت مغز تمرکز کرد، مثلا با مدیتیشن تغییراتی رو ایجاد کرد، یا نه روی روده فوکس کرد و یک تعادلی بین این دوتا ایجاد کرد تا یک ذهن سالم و بدن سالم داشته باشیم. و ایشون گفتن اپروچ خودشون برای بیماران به این صورت هست که ایشون هر دوتا مسئله رو معمولا در نظر میگیرن، یعنی هم روی مغز هم روی روده برای مریضاشون تمرکز میکنن. Professor Meyer, can you talk about the role of stress and the microbiome?
Yeah, so coming back to the concept I just explained to you, this brain-gut microbiome system, it can be exposed. So stress in scientific terms is really what we call a perturbation of the balance of a system. So the stress that the brain-gut microbiome system is exposed to is, the one side, psychological stress from the environment, and obviously we live in a world and society with an increasing amount of chronic stress. Our ancestors dealt with infrequent episodes of often severe stress. Today, this has shifted really to persistent chronic stress. And then there's also the dietary stress. So if we are on an unhealthy diet, it perturbs the balance of that brain-gut microbiome system, just like the brain does. So the worst situation that, the perfect storm that we're in today is that we have both an unhealthy diet that threatens the balance, the homeostasis in that system, and we have the psychological stress. And when these two interact, as they do in many patients, we have the negative outcomes. We have this chronic non-infectious disease epidemic that the Western world is going through, from metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, cancer, even the COVID-19 susceptibility has been partially explained by an imbalance within the system. So we could say that the ultimate cause of many of these chronic illnesses that we're experiencing today, which have been increasing the last 75 years, are really a consequence of this increasing, so we call this allostatic load in medicine. It's the increasing persistent stress that challenges the capacity of the brain-gut microbiome system to respond to it in a healthy way. So it turns in a, what we call a non-adaptive way. It causes damage within the system, within the organs that are involved, and so that's a big part of my second book, the gut-immune connection, that we can explain many of, probably the majority of the most common diseases that we see in the Western world today. They're not infectious diseases. I mean, the pandemic was one transient example. That's not the main problem. Are really these chronic non-infectious metabolic diseases. And one thing that has been identified as a potential common denominator, and again I describe this in detail in my book, is that these chronic stresses, both from the brain and from the diet, from the gut, cause a state of low-grade inflammation in the body, throughout the body. So this is not an inflammation where you get fever and where you can't get out of bed. In many people, this chronic inflammation is completely asymptomatic, but it causes if it's chronic, it causes damage to many of our organs, and it causes chronic liver disease, chronic like fatty liver disease, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, in patients, in individuals that also have a genetic predisposition. So this, you may have that chronic low-grade inflammation in maybe up to 40% of the American population, but not everybody will get these diseases from it, because not everybody has the vulnerability or the risk genes for developing these diseases.
مایر، من از دکتر مایر سوال کردم که در مورد ارتباط استرس با مایکروبیوم ها برای ما توضیح بدن. ایشون گفتن که مغز، روده از لحاظ علمی فعال میشن و در یک رابطه دو جانبه با هم هستن. افزایش استرس باعث به هم ریختن این مایکروبیوم ها میشه و برعکس رژیم غذایی خیلی تأثیر داره روی سیستم مایکروبیوم، همونقدر که مغز میتونه اثر داشته باشه. بنابراین یک نکته مهم تعادل بین این سیستم ها هست و بیماری های خیلی مختلفی رو ایشون اشاره کردن میتونه این ارتباط ایجاد بکنه، این عدم تعادل، مثل بیماری های متابولیک، مثل کنسرها، مثل حتی بیماری های عفونی مثل کووید 19 رو اشاره کردن. شواهد نشون میده که سیستم تغذیه و این سیستم مایکروبیوم میتونه روی ابتلا به این بیماری ها در کنار سوسپتیبیلیتی ژنتیکی، یعنی اگر ژن مساعد کننده رو داشته باشن که حتی میتونه به یک التهاب مزمن در اعضا و ارگان‌های اینها، این استرس مزمن منجر بشه بیماری‌های مختلف مثل بیماری‌های کبدی مزمن، بیماری‌های قلبی، آلزایمر و پارکینسون رو اشاره کردن ایشون که میتونه وجود داشته باشه. Last not the least, Dr. Meyer, how can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so the easiest way is I'm on all the social media, from YouTube to Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. The easiest way to connect with me is probably through my website, emeranmayer.com. When you go to the website, it will ask you to, offer you the possibility to sign up for our newsletter, the Mind Gut Conversation newsletter, which comes out every 2 weeks, and there's also you get on the email list every alternative week. There's a piece of information on a specific aspect of gut health aspects that are of practical value. But if you go to the website of previous podcasts and previous newsletter editions. So that's probably the best way to get started. If you want to dive deeper into it, the two books that I've published, the Brain-Gut Connection, the Mind-Gut Connection, which actually, as a matter of fact, almost 6 years after it came out, is still a #1 bestseller on Amazon in the area of neuroscience. And the gut-immune connection, which explains really this phenomenon that I explained, with this low-grade inflammation being the cause or one of the causes of our chronic disease epidemic, and potentially also contributing to the vulnerability of COVID-19 infections. So there's multiple ways to connect. The simplest one, as I said, going to the website, and then also following me on the various on Instagram and Facebook. So it's easy.
Thank you so much. آقای دکتر میر، من ازشون پرسیدم چطور میتونن به شما دسترسی پیدا کنن کسایی که علاقه‌مندن به این موضوع. ایشون گفتن در سوشال مدیاهای متعددی هستن مثل یوتیوب، لینکدین، اینستاگرام و وبسایتشون emeran.mayer.com رو معرفی کردن و 2 کتابشون رو هم معرفی کردن و میتونید بهترین راه رو ایشون وبسایتشون معرفی کردن و نیوزلتر هایی که ایشون از این طریق برای شما خواهند فرستاد. Professor Meyer, I greatly appreciate your time and the wonderful, phenomenal information. I have tons of questions remaining. I would love to invite you for one more session to share your wonderful discoveries with our audiences.
Yeah, I would certainly be willing to do this. You know, if there's an interest in this, it's certainly something I think that a lot of people now, you know, are craving for answers, including the Persian community, which I know because I'm married to a Persian wife. So
yeah, you have a wonderful wife. Minu did great in communicating for coordinating this. I appreciate it.
Okay, well, thanks again.
And I would love to invite Minu at this session for a special talk in this well-respected American Persian TV.
Okay, I'll pass this on. And in the meantime, you know, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you and to talk to your audience. And hopefully this will be of interest to them.
Thank you so much. I feel so thrilled for this interview. I appreciate it.
Okay, bye-bye.
بای. بله، ما از آقای دکتر میر باز هم دعوت خواهیم کرد که ایشون همسرشون ایرانی هستند و امیدواریم که در برنامه‌های آینده از توضیحات مفید و کشف‌هایشون شما رو بتونیم آگاه بکنیم. برنامه ما هر سه‌شنبه ساعت 6 بعد از ظهر به وقت غرب ایالات متحده مطابق با 4:30 بامداد در ایران پخش میشه با تازه ترین های پزشکی و اجتماعی. تا برنامه بعدی، روز و روزگار خوش.